Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the first of our debates as part of our Manufacturing at the Crossroads series. This is very much an overview debate. We're talking about the issues raised in our documentary, which was published last Monday, which set out a number of roads ahead to aim for manufacturing in the UK, had recommendations for government, policymakers, and manufacturers. I'll run through them very quickly before we get going. From government, we were looking for a clear commitment and recognition that manufacturing is part of our national economic security, looking for long-term, robust, and a flexible industrial strategy that includes a strong devolved regional element. That devolved regional element, very, very important. Reintroduction of an office for manufacturing or an industrial council, but most importantly, one that has teeth, that has statutory powers, not unakin to the Office for Budget Responsibility or the Committee for Climate Change. Also to have a much sharper focus representation from industry players large and small. For policymakers, for financial support for manufacturers to be increased and better targeted, allocated to achieve productivity enhancing investment. Funding application should be assessed according to appropriate metrics, a proper business growth, not just job creation. Job creation has been the main metric for so long in this country, but nowadays we have close to full employment. Why do we have to create more jobs when people are actually looking to have the jobs done that they can't get filled by people? And policy, including fiscal policy, should be adapted to the needs of small companies, and process should be streamlined from start to finish. And from manufacturers, there was a big ask coming out of our program last week. They should demonstrate a bolder growth mindset. They should embrace all available opportunities, especially in growth sectors at home and abroad. And they must invest more in people, process, and product. At which point, let us introduce our panel. We've got Katherine Bennett, the CEO of the high-value manufacturing Catapult. Sir Vince Cable, of course, who was a former business secretary in the coalition government of 2010-2015. Bill Esterson, the Shadow Minister for Manufacturing. Very warm welcome to you, Bill. Had a great time with your boss, Jonathan Reynolds, the Shadow Business Secretary, who was on our program last week. Andrea Wilson, Director of Honall and an ardent advocate for SMEs to get better recognition from government. Paul Cantwell, who's with the National Manufacturing Institute Scotland. Paul Bagwell, founder of Halo Appliances. Barry Leahey, President of Playdale Playgrounds up there in Cumbria. Ian Minton, who's Technology Capability Director, hope I got that right, Ian at BAE Systems. Alan Norbury, who's Chief Technical Officer at Siemens Digital Industries, and Johnny Williamson, my co-presenter. Okay, just before we get going, I just want to make clear that this is not just another talking shop. We don't want people to say we need an industrial strategy. We know we need an industrial strategy. What we want to find out is what kind of manufacturing sector we're looking for in this country and how we're going to achieve it. Perhaps if I can ask Vince Cable first of all. So Vince, what comes first? You've dealt with this. You've been business secretary. You understand industrial strategy. What comes first? Do you actually have to have a long-term vision of what you want to achieve and then kind of reverse engineer what policies you need to create that?
Well, I think it's an element of both of those. There have been periods until really quite recently under successive governments which have signed up to the idea, well, two things, really. First, the government and the private sector working together. And secondly, the idea of long-termism, which is particularly critical in manufacturing because of the long cycles in investment. And this was understood in the latter years of the Labour government, and Peter Mandelson did some good work in this area. I tried to revive it and expand it, and we had, I think, a reasonably well-functioning industrial strategy, which was helpful to the car industry, aerospace, bioscience, and some actually non-manufacturing sectors, which also benefited from the same approach, the creative industries. And then that continued after a hiatus with Sajid Javid, who declared that he didn't believe in industrial strategies. But shortly afterwards, Theresa May and Greg Clark took the idea forward, and we had 3 very constructive years in which they built on what my own and my predecessors had been doing. So, I mean, it can be done, under successive governments have shown that it can be done. But it doesn't, you do need cross-party consensus, because if this just becomes a political football, it's no use whatever to the businesses which are trying to make good investments. I hope there will be a revival when we have a change of government, but it will be crucial to get sort of buy-in across the spectrum. Otherwise, businesses are not going to take it seriously.
Bill Esterson, if I can come to you, do you agree with what Vince was saying there? Because I interviewed the then industry minister, Lee Rowley, back in April. And he said you cannot possibly have an industrial strategy / policy that the electorate have not voted for. It has to be within the grasp of any new incoming government to change it at the end of the previous government. Do you think that's right, or do you agree with Vince that this has to be long-standing cross-party?
Well, thanks, Nick. It's great to be on with you. And absolutely, industrial strategy has to be long-term. It has to be cross-party. It has to be multi-parliament. It's the only way. We are not going to turn around our prospects unless we have certainty and confidence over a great many years. We've got to reverse the decline. We've seen anemic growth. We've seen worse than anemic investment. We've got the worst investment figures on record at the moment, and productivity has simply not kept up with our competitors. There has to be, I think Vince touched on this right at the start of his answer, actually, the key to this is partnership. So the industrial strategy that Labour published at our conference at the end of September, the title is Prosperity Through Partnership. It's a very simple concept. So the evidence comes from both sides of industry. It's put into practice by creating the conditions by stability in government. And right now, we're far from stable, not least because of the mini budget. We've got to create that confidence, attract that investment, create that long-term sense. And actually, I think Vince did really well, because he talked about some of the historical aspects of this. I'll just use one example from our time in government, where we created the Automotive Council. We didn't create it on our own, created it with the car industry, and it gave a real renaissance to the industry. And what came out of the Automotive Council, which, to be fair to Vince and to the Conservatives after the end of the coalition, has been sustained. And what we've seen through that partnership is world-class companies in this country. The problem now is, without a strategy, without an interventionist approach from government, without the conditions that are needed to attract that investment to this country, where companies are competing with their own peers in other countries, there's a real threat, not just in the car industry, but right across industry. So it's got to be long-term, it's got to be multi-party.
Thank you very much indeed, Bill. Katherine, Bennett, if I can ask you, you're right there on the front lines, if you like, crossing the divide, if there is a divide, but knitting together, should I say, academia and industry, and fostering the R&D that goes with it. Now, you wrote an article in City AM last August about how manufacturing in the UK could move from 10% GDP to 15% GDP. That is obviously something that we would all applaud. I mean, it's a 50% increase. What are the key takeaways we should take from your article?
Oh, thank you, Nick, for the question. And if I could quickly comment a bit, if you don't mind, on the industrial strategy discussion. As Vince hopefully may remember, I was very involved in the aerospace growth partnership when I was at Airbus, and actually I'm now still involved in that, and involved in what Bill just mentioned, the Automotive Council, now in my new role. And despite what ministers say, the industrial strategy is very much alive and kicking amongst industry. So these organisations continue. Government is still involved in those two particular growth partnerships. And whilst some ministers may not wish to comment too much and use the words industrial strategy, this roundtable discussion and forward-looking focus is still continuing. So the heritage is still there. I guess the big question is what happens into the future? And also the other question, which we may like to get on later, Nick, is what are the new areas that we need to maybe get growth partnerships for? So I would talk particularly about hydrogen and other sectors. But with respect to your question, yes, we're happy to be ambitious, and we talk in the Catapult about being the bridge between academia and business, as you said in your question. And obviously we work with many, many partners. We've been around for 10 years now, the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, and we've worked with many, many thousands of businesses, large and small. So we continually getting feedback. Now, I'm sure as other people on this call will say, and I know there's people here from the SME community, and Andrea, particularly focused on your campaigns. I know about getting the messages about SMEs, and that's important for me to get over as well. But our ambition is to get the UK up the rankings in terms of where it stands globally in terms of manufacturing. Not just looking back to where we were in the history, but actually we have the capability to raise up in the rankings. So we're currently 9 globally, the UK, and we want to get up to at least 5. And how do we do that? Well, laser focused on supply chains. I mean, even on the news this morning, we saw the Select Committee report on the semiconductor industry. Automotive industry is really suffering from resilience issues. And of course, encourage companies to spend more in R&D, and R&D specifically tailored towards improving manufacturing and productivity. So we've got to get the R&D expenditure going. We're still quite low down in terms of rankings compared to the EU and of course the US in terms of spend on R&D. And my organisation is all about helping de-risk innovation, encouraging companies to spend more and using some of the government money that we have available to help with that. And the other, so aside from supply chain resilience, spending on R&D, the other point of, well, of course, is skills, which I know, Nick, we never have a session with you when we don't talk about skills. But this is absolutely the future we need to be more ready for. We need to have the good foresighting, which we've done a number of projects on, but it's all of those together that we feel, why not be ambitious and aim for higher achievements in terms of rankings.
I'd like to bring Johnny Williamson, my co-presenter of the programme and long time partner in arms, into the conversation, Johnny, because I think there's one area I would just like to cover off, and I want to get reaction from our panelists on this, but it is about the regional clusters we were talking about and how, in fact, if we don't get some of that regional development going, we may have problems down the line. So can you just recap what you were talking about during the programme when it comes to regional development?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the example I gave during the programme was zero carbon Humber, which is effectively taking the UK's largest carbon emitter and flipping it on its head and giving it a long-term low carbon future, not only to safeguard a huge amount of jobs there already in the petrochemical industry, safeguarding, I think it was 55,000 jobs, but actually creating an equal amount of new jobs and driving through education opportunities for even more. And the key point for that was, obviously, there's a huge opportunity within the UK to drive work into the UK supply chain, keep that value within the UK. But these are global opportunities. Everybody is investing and exploring heavily a hydrogen economy. So if we take a leading foot forward, we've got the opportunity to obviously build that capability in the UK, but then deliver that to the rest of the world. If we don't, then obviously the reverse will apply, in so much that the leaders will be elsewhere and they will be looking to pitch in and support our infrastructure projects and take that value that we could retain ourselves. So there's a real opportunity here and a real opportunity cost for not getting it right, I suppose.
Yeah, can I bring in some manufacturers at this point, because I think it's important to get manufacturers' point of view. Paul, I'll get to your question in just a second, but Barry Leahey up there in the Northwest, the regional policy, particularly given where you are in Cumbria, I mean, this must have been a running topic of conversation for many years. What's your view on what Johnny's saying about clustering and what you've heard about the industrial strategy that our previous guest spoke about?
Hi Nick, hi everyone. Just do it in two parts really. One is about the plan, the industrial strategy. You'll hear me bang on about it. Yes, we need a plan. There was debate in the program, wasn't there, about what we call the plan? I think that's a non-debate. We just need a plan. Yeah, we need leadership and a plan. And when I say a plan, I say what is the UK? Now, everyone's going to throw me off the program right now when I say the plan might be that we're not going to be a nation of manufacturers, and if so, then that's the plan. But we actually at the UK don't know what the plan is. And I always go back to, and I'm not very good at history or anything, but Singapore, when they, claimed independence, they had a plan, didn't they? In 50 years' time, we'll be the biggest port in Asia, etc. And they've been laser focused to do that. And anyone that spends any time in Singapore, I'd actually say, if you walk down the street, you class that as success. And yes, they do have areas of deprivation and all of that. I know that. But as a country, they've repositioned themselves, and no longer are we, I talk about, I'm part of the Great Campaign. Yeah. I've been in 60 countries, guys, in the last 10 years. And we've got to drop that arrogance of thinking we're great because we're a little island in the middle of nowhere. All right. And there's a competitive world outside there, and everyone else is doing good stuff like this. And with a plan, we've got some direction of where the UK is going. And on the back of that plan, and I like Catherine's, it's the first time ever anyone's ever said, let's go from 9th to 5th. I can't imagine us being in the World Cup right now and saying, hey, let's finish 9th. And everyone like cheering about it. Yeah, and I don't think we'd be that happy with 5th either, but we'll also, with our British arrogance, convince ourselves after beating one team that we might win it. But, a plan wouldn't say, let's go from 9th to 5th. A plan would say, this is where we want to be, and therefore we would have to be the 6th biggest manufacturer in the world or the 4th biggest manufacturer in the world. The plan would drive what we need to be. And therefore, you then start to deliver towards it and put things in place like regional clusters, which I think is a fantastic idea and has been talked about, and there's organizations talking about clustering. You talked about the zero carbon around the manufacturing, but, like what media's done, we've got Media City in Manchester, let's put it, and then we said, let's level it up and put Channel 4 in Leeds. We're so close to got all the media people in one place, and then we put them over the other side of the Pennines. But, why don't we have a manufacturing? Why don't we just, as part of it, realize where the UK is going to be geography? And if it's in Cumbria, it's in Cumbria, but I very much doubt it. But, we're managing to crack on, like Catherine says, it's very much alive because we have our own plan. And unfortunately, that's what we've got to deliver to.
Andrea, can I come to you while we're on the subject? Because Katherine paid tribute to the work you're doing in trying to lead greater recognition for SMEs. Running a business as you do in the precision industry, engineering industry, how do you feel about the position of your company at the moment in the greater scheme of things and looking forward? What would you look for in an industrial strategy?
Well, I guess, how do I feel at the moment in all of this? It's the title of my presentation at Cranfield University at the Materials Week tomorrow, which is we're the unsung heroes. And if you Google the definition of unsung hero, it's an SME all over, because we are vital in the supply chain. We are vital to support these larger businesses, but unfortunately, we're not the ones with the voice that are helping actually define policy. Exact examples of that are basically things along the lines of the latest R&D tax credit reduction. It's been reduced because there are some instances of fraud, and then all SMEs have been punished as a result of some overeager consultants. The AMRC that you and I were speaking about earlier, Nick, with the Fit for Nuclear, you need to spend £30,000 to actually be a member before you even think about joining Fit for Nuclear as a programme. That investment's just absolutely impossible as an SME. Vince might remember, I asked him at a Make UK conference about 10, 11 years ago, maybe, about a Minister for Manufacturing requiring an all-party agreed plan. You know, as businesses, we need to plan our capital investments over 5-10 years. Changes every 6 months, 12 months, if in the last few months, week, are not helping any of that. They're not helping us gain confidence. They're not helping us plan to invest or plan to grow. We want to grow, we want to invest, but it seems at every corner we actually hit a barrier. And that is just absolutely impossible for small businesses like myself.
I would have to say that in any plan going forward, if the voice and role of the SME community, which after all is about 96% of manufacturers in the UK, if it's not acknowledged and not really formed part of that strategy, then nothing is going to work. It's as simple as that. I'm getting nods from Andrea on that. Paul Cantwell, you're at National Manufacturing Institute Scotland. You raised a really interesting issue during the documentary program around green shoring as being an opportunity for UK manufacturing going forward. Tell us a little bit about it, and also does it align in any way with green steel, which is what we've also heard about from the steel industry in recent years?
Yeah, green shoring is all around creating a low carbon manufacturing base. You know, this is very important to UK because currently the embodied emissions in manufactured products account for around 43% of the total UK consumption emissions. Now, it's all well and good in talking about these regional developments to decarbonise infrastructure, setting ambitious targets to create a low carbon kind of resource or energy supply. But as we look at some of these demonstrators, we're left asking the question, where is the local content? Where is the supply chain growth opportunity? And how are we supporting more local content or supporting the small to medium-sized enterprises to diversify into new sectors, or to actually drive more local content in terms of the materials and the community of practice, in best practice of net zero compliance, because that's a legal obligation, 2050 for the UK, 2045 for Scotland, to achieve that near net manufacturing capacity and capability. And approximately 70% of the total embodied emissions in manufacturing comes from the material supply. So we've got a real opportunity to take the old infrastructure, the piles of kind of waste that we traditionally export, and try to drive inward investment to create a low carbon recycling capacity to supply small to medium-sized enterprises to develop the great products and services and have a true impact on their carbon footprint. So it's all about inward investment, informed decision-making, but also cross-sectorial sharing of missions and strategies on material strategies and inward investment, and enabling those companies to act against the call of scrutiny that the OEMs will start to apply to ensure that they're compliant to the net zero targets.
Thanks, Paul. And I'd like to bring Alan Norbury of Siemens in here, because talking about future capabilities for UK manufacturing and making ourselves fit for them, you've got some very pertinent views, particularly when it comes to the tooling required for building modern factories for this century.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yeah, one of the challenges that I think we face in the UK is that we focus on our large manufacturing and tend to quite often forget about supply chain. And as there's a number of emerging markets that are growing, we need to develop a strategy to fit in with those emerging markets. And one example is battery manufacturing. So the demand for battery manufacturing at the moment demands around 750 gigawatt hours. By 2030, that's going to grow to 4,500 gigawatt hours. That's 25% compound growth per year. Now, the challenge that we face is if you walk through a battery manufacturing facility, you'll see that probably 70 or 80% of the machines are bought from Asia, from North America. Very few of those machines are bought from the UK. And the crazy thing is the government are supporting this battery upscaling, which is the right thing to do, but then taxpayers' money then investing in machines that are built in Asia. And what I found is there are many UK companies that can actually adapt what they're doing in other sectors to produce machines that can manufacture batteries. So there's absolutely no reason why they couldn't put a mandate on that funding to say that, you know, a percentage of it has to be from UK manufacturing. So that's the first thing. But the second challenge is that they might be cheapest chips if you buy it from China today, but in 5 or 10 years time when demand for these machines grow and grow around the world, who's going to get the priority in terms of support and service and spare parts? I don't think it's going to be the UK. It's going to be China. It's going to be America. So actually, that short-termism of investing in very cheapest chips machines today, actually in the long term, will be to our detriment. So if you do it the other way around, where we pay a little bit more today, we build up our capabilities, and it means we then could also start to export these machines around the world as demand grows. So it's a very, very simple solution. There's one particular company that I was looking at this morning called Shoe Lead, I think it's called. They have over 6,000 employees in China, and all they do is produce machines that manufacture batteries. And apparently they're going to open a facility in Germany on the back of a contract with Volkswagen. So their strategy is already there. And one thing that I did notice, I've read on the new US National Strategy for Advanced Manufacturing, that they're focusing on building resilience for manufacturing supply chain in America and reducing the manufacturing supply chain vulnerabilities. And it's part of their strategy. And I think we could quite easily cut and paste that advanced manufacturing strategy, and it could become the UK industrial strategy, because all the things they talk about equally apply to the UK.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. I think this is going to be one of those key debates going forward. Katherine, can I just bring you in on that? Because you are obviously at the core of discussions like this. And I remember Sam Turner, when he was CTO at the Catapult, saying to me, over a year ago now, he said, unless we have a machine tool capability in this country going forward, we won't be able to achieve what you want to do, which is to get us from 9 to 5 or 9 to 1 even.
There's certainly things that need to be really focused on, and I completely agree with what Alan said about targeting particular areas. Where are the gaps in our, what have we allowed to let slip? And one of the roles that we play is very much sort of foresighting, looking across the landscape, making sure that we do have expertise, at least in one of our centres across our 25 sites, the right equipment that companies need to learn about. It is quite hard for our Catapult to pick winners too, if I use that phrase that is often referred to as part of industrial strategy. The most important thing is, though, that we receive feedback from manufacturers about what they need, but also keep them up to date in things that we're finding out from overseas. And companies like Siemens and other larger international companies bring great expertise that we in the UK maybe need to listen to a little bit more in terms of, are we investing in the right things? But very, very much focused though on digital, which I know is a key thing a number of the panelists might wish to comment on later.
Thank you very much, Katherine. Vince Cable, you wanted to come back in.
Yeah, I thought it'd be quite useful, partly responding to some of the points we've just had in terms of what needs to happen next. I mean, what are the concrete steps that need to be taken? I mean, I think first the point that was made about the need for an overall plan is absolutely essential. And we're talking about 10 years or longer rather than just 5 years of a parliament. I think, secondly, the sectoral approach has worked very well. As we've heard, cars and aerospace, it needs to be others. Several people have mentioned hydrogen. I mean, I'm trying to practice what I preach on the board of a hydrogen company, but it's creating a hydrogen infrastructure. I mean, it's all very well producing it, but you've got to carry it from place A to B. I don't know whether infrastructure counts as manufacturing, but it's certainly part of the equation. Then thirdly, we need the right institutions. We've got the catapults, they're brilliant. It's amazing that they survived trial by fire from the Treasury, but it survived, and that's great. We need institutions that provide supporting patient finance, and the British Business Bank's useful but needs enlargement. We need to recreate the Green Investment Bank or some variant of it. And as several people have said, where we're badly deficient is having the right structures for training. We did start that. The Labour government did, my government did, and then it was sidelined because of the apprenticeship levy. But we need a proper structure for that. Otherwise, the training debate is just not heading anywhere. And I think finally, the regional perspective, and I do confess that the industrial strategy I was involved was weak on that. And we do need a regional focus, but talking about it is fine. That the regions need to have the borrowing powers and the tax powers of Scotland and Wales and potentially Northern Ireland. Otherwise, it's just talking. There's a big step in terms of the devolution of finance before regional clusters mean anything.
Thank you very much, Vince. Bill Esterson, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks very much. Look, I mean, we've got to invest in the regions. Gordon Brown's doing some work for the Labour Party on how we establish meaningful economic devolution to go along with political devolution. And I'm an MP in the Northwest. We are very, very strong in manufacturing in the Northwest. We have a really good political settlement where you've got two very strong regional mayors with Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham, and nearby we have Wales, where manufacturing, where you have very strong partnership between regional government or national government in the case of Wales and business. But the other thing I wanted to add to what Vince touched on, skills, that's come up a couple of times. Absolutely right. But it's what are the quick wins? There's definitely some quick wins to be had in how we target the levy to be used by SMEs. There's definitely some quick wins to be had in the levy being used for retraining and upskilling. And for example, the oil and gas workforce are going to be the obvious people to be moving into renewable energy and into low carbon. That's going to take a training ask. But there's some other quick wins too. Government procurement. I was really, really frustrated at the government decision to give a Spanish consortium the lead on the Fleet Solid support ship contract last week. And this was an opportunity to create 100% of that investment into UK manufacturing to support our steel industry, which is under real stress, both at Scunthorpe and at Port Talbot at the moment. And of course, Scunthorpe is essential for the UK automotive industry too. And it's these kinds of opportunities where government can play its part with, but don't require any legislation, where it's just about government using its spending power. So there are some quick wins like that. And obviously, I don't know if anybody wants to get into Brexit, but there are some obvious areas there where we need to reduce friction, both for imports of parts and materials, and indeed to support our exporters. So, just some thoughts there around quick wins and how they fit in around industrial strategy and the sorts of things that we would like to do.
Thanks, Bill. That was really helpful. I don't think we're going to go down the Brexit route. I think there's more than enough that we'll be here for a couple of 3 hours if we do that, but I do appreciate the point you made. Steve Murphy, very warm welcome. You've got a point you'd like to make.
Yeah. The point I'd like to make is that maybe some of the panel could help, because I think you're all better networked than I am, is that there's a huge group of people that in our campaign for manufacturing we don't seem to be engaging, and that is the trade union movement. So I admit, that when I was a lad and when I was brought up, the friction between the unions and the management was not very positive. But I think there's a lot of trade union leaders have learned an awful lot. I've not worked in a lot of unionized factories, but those I've worked in, I've engaged with the trade union. And on the whole, putting your case for continuous improvement fairly clearly with them, on the whole, there are a lot of them who are very positive. So I don't see anything happening from manufacturing to try and engage with the trade unions in public. But is there anything happening consciously otherwise that I'm just unaware of?
Well, Steve, I don't know if you noticed that the TUC a few weeks ago, the GMB, I think it was, they had a composite motion which was passed, which called for pretty much the same industrial strategy. I think that not certain it was a complete overlap with what Labour is asking for. And I must say that I have been struck at every turn, whenever I've done stories about companies that have worked closely with trade unions, the result has always been 1 + 1 makes 3. And I think you're quite right to suggest that they are brought that brought front and center into the conversation, because how many times do we have to hear manufacturers or any business say, our people are our business, and then kind of ignore them? It happens all the time, so it's a point worth making. Paul Cantwell, hi.
Thanks, Nick. I just wanted to go back to some of the points that kind of Vince and even Bill made around, there's some great key technology enablers such as hydrogen and wind, to name another one. There's some great opportunities with supply chains transitioning to new areas, oil and gas to the carbon capture. The real challenge is a lot of the sector strategies set the targets and ambitions of when to achieve kind of a reduction of embedded carbon or greenhouse gas emissions, but they don't go as far as stating the key technologies and enablers that's required, that's going to shape our future supply chain, that's going to shape our local content and drive change in terms of local job creation, higher GVA, and achieving what Katherine is right to point out, that we could become a stronger, more competitive basis. And part of that relates to one of the comments made in a chat or the Q&A around carbon accounting or greenhouse gas accounting and reporting. How do we create a fair competitive market when predominantly it's always driven by cost in some areas? What we've got to introduce is some carbon tax or something that demonstrates that cheaper isn't always better. And how do we incentivize more local content? How do we drive sector strategic documents to point out those key technologies enablers to then drive a change in supply chain to make that inward investment? And we're seeing that with private investment, where they're looking for those more greener companies to free up that equity. And we're seeing the same with Innovate UK or other public trading bodies. Parties need to report on their net zero journey.
Just want to come back on some of the points that people are making in the chat box. Reference what I was saying about trade unions. Katherine Bennett has put me pretty much straight by saying that trade unions do sit on the growth partnerships. I personally think that the conversation needs to be broader, but thank you for putting me straight on that. Vince said trade unions are very helpful around key issues in the car industry, the future of Ellesmere Port, for example. And Katherine, again, coming back on something that Andrea mentioned, she's just checked on the Fit for Nuclear supply chain activity. It is free for SMEs to access. So very well worth getting that point across. Katherine, thank you very much indeed for doing that. Alan Norbury, you have a point to raise.
Yeah, I think the attitude of trade unions has changed dramatically over the years, and from an Arbor lad anyway. And I think they understand there's a need for innovation. So in our factory in Congleton, where we manufacture variable speed drives, we knew at some point we had to start to introduce robotics. And the way we did that was in partnership with the shop floor operators. And we made everything open, so perspex glass in the robots so they can ask questions about it. And the strategy for us is to keep the same number of employees and increase productivity. The danger is if you don't increase productivity, then there will be competition somewhere in the world that actually could take that business over, which means we're all out of a job. So I think it's really important that unions understand that, and I think they do. And then we work in partnership with them. So what do we do with the people who would have done that job before? Well, we upskill them, we retrain them, and they do probably more enjoyable jobs, and it works. So that partnership, that relationship with the trade unions is really important, and they should be part of the long-term strategy as well.
Thanks, Alan. Barry Leahey.
Just really want to echo Alan's points there. And it's not often I agree with big businesses like Siemens, right? but it's exactly that, and we're really scared of saying it out loud. We have got to do a hell of a lot more with what we've already got, as in people. And I said it in the program. Every form you fill in, every metric that is measured is about how many jobs you're going to create or how many jobs you're going to secure. We've got everybody employed that wants to be employed at this moment in time. We haven't got the skills, so why create additional roles? Where our focus needs to be is on automation, digitization, and the byproduct of that should be net zero. I don't believe that should be a driver, by the way, just to cause a bit of, uproar. They should just be rules that we stick to, the legislation that means the byproduct is we get a win there as well. It's got to be around automation and digitization, and that is what the rest of the world are doing. And we are obsessed with how many jobs we're going to create and how many jobs we're going to secure. And we've got to have that vision of what Congleton had and says, how do we become more competitive? Well, you don't become more competitive by adding a desk, a computer, and a table for every time you want to grow.
Thank you. Kirsty Davies-Chinook, if you could turn your video on, I'd appreciate it. And you've got a question you'd like to ask the panel.
Yeah, thank you very much. We're talking about an industrial strategy, and we say we want one, but we don't know who's going to set it, how long it's going to be for. I think the point I want to make is that there are so many different manufacturing industries, so many that are myriad over the UK. Barry mentioned automation and digitalisation and making us more productive rather than employing more people, which I fully agree with. And Andrea mentioned SMEs being the unsung heroes. And all of this will work together for a green strategy. We're doing a lot, we're an SME, and on the day we announce the next step on decarbonising mechanical finishing, the IP which I'm making available to my competitors, I'm not keeping it for myself, with work we've done with universities, are to come who are doing the same thing. But what we need to do is share that. We need to talk to each other, not give away trade secrets, but there needs to be more conversations, and we're not having them.
Well, I'll leave that question out there for somebody to come back and answer. But the points being made about automation and greater capability, a much greater productivity. I want to bring in Paul Bagwell, because I just think I find Paul's story really, really interesting. If you saw the program, you'll have noticed that Paul is he's a startup with a vacuum cleaner called Halo Capsule, which is getting rave reviews everywhere. I rang him up and said, great stuff, great British company, where do you have them made? And so unfortunately not in the UK at present. And so the question, Paul, is why could you not have them made in the UK? Can you give us the story on that and what it would take in order for us to do that?
Absolutely. So at Halo, we want to do what's right for our brand and what's right for our customers. And we believe in being local for a number of reasons. Firstly, the environmental impact, and what we ultimately want to do is go to be cradle to cradle. So we are taking products back in and turning them into new products. You can't do that overseas. And also talking to our customers. They now care more than ever about where things come from. We are not low volume, high value. We make a domestic product. Halo appliances make vacuum cleaners. Those vacuum cleaners are, competitive with everything else in the market, and we need to make sure we source competitively as a result. Looking to do that, when we first started as a startup, we had to go where the skills were. We had to go where the communities are, and it's something some of the other panelists have mentioned. It's not just about having one manufacturer. It's not just about having one supplier. It's about having a community. And that's something that doesn't really exist today in the UK, as a community of high volume, big shipments coming out of these factories, which then have the supply base they can call upon. And that's the thing that we've missed. That's the thing that wasn't available to us. Because this is so important to us, so important to our customers, we want to develop this, but we know we're going to have to, make some big steps, make some big investments ourselves to push it forward, because it's not there. If I go and take this to Asia or take this somewhere else in the world, there are people looking to support us with getting this done. In the UK, we have to do it ourselves.
That to me was, it may be obvious really, because as we know, we've lost a lot of capability and a lot of muscle during the years of offshoring and globalization. But to hear of a sort of world-class, world-beating, dare I use that phrase, vacuum cleaner, devised, produced and designed in the UK, and not being able to be made here was very sad. So the question to the panel is, can we realistically look forward, perhaps, to regenerating our volume consumer products industry in this country? We know that we a lot of companies out there making EBAC. They make washing machines. I think there are a lot. This doesn't mean there's nobody out there doing it, but we need to do more of it. Should we be doing more of it? Can we do more of it? And what is it going to take to get us there? Who'd like to pick that up? Andrea.
I think there are plenty of businesses willing to do that. I think there are plenty of businesses that would love to explore those opportunities. The problem we have is that those businesses cannot get the right skills. I've just noted the comment in there saying the universities are doing some fantastic work in engineering, and we do. In the UK, we have some of the best engineering universities for training and bringing out amazing graduates, but we don't have anything below it. We don't have that within the schools, the primary schools, the junior schools, secondary schools. We don't have it at further education colleges. Our local college got a £5 million grant to build a new engineering centre just down the road from us. And 5 years later, after having everything that the new LSIP is requesting, which is feedback from industry, after having all that, there is still no engineering happening in the engineering centre in Leighton Buzzard. You know, we need a completely different framework for skills and being able to upskill and also train unskilled into skilled. And we need to be able to do it within our own businesses, and that to be a justifiable business expense. It's ridiculous. I can hire someone to come in here and teach us how to do something really pathetic, like make a cup of coffee, and it's a justifiable business expense. The fact I can't actually upskill or retrain unskilled people and have it as a justifiable business expense is just ludicrous. We don't have time for the education system to change. We need skills now.
That, as I always say, you know, if you get 2 or more manufacturers in the room, within 15 minutes they're going to be talking about skills. It's and that, of course, is not within, will not be within Bill Esterson's remit. If and when he's in office, it'll be the Department for Education, and that perhaps is one of the problems. Ian Minton from BAE Systems. I know that BAE Systems fosters SME technologies, believes deeply in doing that as part of its leadership, if you like, in UK manufacturing. You've got your hand raised. Which point would you like to address?
I think both. One thing I wanted to just pick up on Andrea's point about how we're trying to work really with different areas of employment. So recognizing that if we recruit normally, we receive a certain demographic of people into the area, and there's quite a few demographics and quite a few age groups that aren't necessarily the ones we pick because we're looking for experienced people. So we've been working with academies such as Iron 4.0, looking at skills. How do you develop those skills for people who perhaps left the industry and want to come back, or who are perhaps looking for areas? So I think that's one of the things in the skills agenda, is how do we look at the breadth of the people that are available as well, our own and outside, and how do we help all of them rather than looking at the young talent coming through as the only pipeline. There are many others. Just going to your point, Nick, about the SMEs, we worked quite hard over the last 3 years in terms of working with SMEs in terms of technology and trying to create opportunities for people to look at technologies, to mature them with us in our factory of the future. We recognise in aerospace things aren't necessarily at the speed that the SMEs can work with. A lot of the time, our time frames and SMEs are quite different as we develop new products, be that in many different areas of defence and aerospace. So by doing the research and then trying to look at it, we tried to create opportunities for SMEs to come and develop product to get to a point where they could see how that could work, that they could then go and use elsewhere and perhaps sell as a final solution, even though we are looking for maybe something that's 5-10 years down the line as to how that fits. And that encompassed something which I think the other aspect I bring is, and we touched on it earlier, is that manufacturing, how digital has entered, and it's like sustainability. It is the world we live in now. It's not something different. It's not a bolt on over the top. It's something we have to come to terms with, and it's increasingly, certainly in a traditional area like aerospace, blurring those lines between what is a manufacturing person, what is a digital person, what is an engineer, as they become, well, they have to be everything. And we have to then develop technologies, skills, processes that encompass all of that going forwards.
Okay, thanks very much, Ian. Bill Esterson, I don't know which point you want to come back to, but I'd just like to have somebody at some stage come back on Paul's point about, you know, can we develop that volume manufacturing capability in the UK? Is it desirable? Should we? Bill?
The answer is absolutely we can. It goes back to what Catherine said earlier about having that aspiration to push ourselves up the league table. I'd probably hesitate to put a figure on other than we want to be the best we can be. And when we've got world-class manufacturing, we really can be the best. But look, there are other countries who are doing so much better in so many areas. Let's just take gigafactories for an example, because I think infrastructure as well as skills really apply here. This is the government role, so it's probably the best thing for me to comment on. If Germany has 5 gigafactories already with another 4 in the pipeline, why don't we? If other countries are making similar progress, why aren't we? And it comes down to the attitude and the approach and the strategy. Public investment and subsidy is key in all those countries who are making greater progress in gigafactories and across the piece, actually. So we have to adopt the same kind of approaches and learn from that best practice around the world. And to transport as well, I was at the Northern Powerhouse conference last Wednesday. We were talking about Northern Powerhouse Rail. We've been told in the autumn statement we're only going to get the core Northern Powerhouse Rail. It just won't cut it for raising the productivity and the performance of the north of England. There's a £16 billion deficit per year in the economic output of the north of England because of poor transport links. We've got to turn these things round. And just coming back to skills, finally, Nick, in answer to this, absolutely. You quite rightly said that skills sits in education, and it is a problem in the way that we govern in this country. You have different departments with different responsibilities who, because of the structure of the civil service and political parties too, don't talk to each other, and it's almost deliberately designed in that they don't. But at the moment, Toby Perkins, who's my colleague in the shadow education team, and I have exactly the same view on this. We've got to enable upskilling and reskilling to be a part of the skills agenda and the use of the levy. We've got to enable that levy to go to SMEs to encourage the training of apprenticeships for businesses of all sizes. And those kinds of ambitions, that kind of real shift in approach is essential, because I don't accept that we will succeed as an economy without revitalising our manufacturing. I don't accept, and I think, Alan really described this extremely well earlier about the threat to us if we don't as well, where we will just drop down the list of priorities when it comes to maintaining or getting new equipment and new products. If we don't do something about it now, and we face competition from increasingly strong players in around the world, actually not just China, Indonesia, India, and we have to intervene. We have to invest now, and that's why why industrial strategy is so critical. And I'll just repeat what I put in the chat. I really do want everybody and anybody who's interested in this to read our strategy and tell us what the details are that we need, because it'll only work in government if it's informed now by the evidence, and in government we've got partners alongside us who will implement it with us, not least because it's your strategy and not ours.
Bill, that sounds very encouraging, and I know a lot of people will be quietly giving a thumbs up to that. I'm conscious of the hour. I'm not going to cut this off directly at 3:30, but I know some of you have got a hard stop, and I'd like to give Katherine Bennett from HVM Catapult the opportunity to come back and reflect on what you've heard and recommend some concrete actions, if you'd like to, Katherine, about how we can start to nail this into a future strategy. Because, as I say, we really want these conversations to be about hard and fast recommendations that policymakers today and of the future can take forward.
Well, thank you, Nick. Just to come back on Kirsty's question, how can we collaborate better? Well, manufacturing TV is one place to start. There's also other outlets, of course, and Make UK, and through Catapult, of which where Paul is based, NMIS is one of the centres, part of the HVM Catapult. We do a lot of convening, conferences, etc. And I know there's a lot of ambition to do even more. So absolutely, on the IP question you raised as well, it's good that it is shared, but at the same time, it is also value for your company. I appreciate that. In terms of more generally, we're moving fast. We want to be ambitious, as I said earlier. We want to raise ourselves up in the rankings, but what we've got to be clued up on, talked about gigafactories, but the opportunities for the future I love what you said, Paul, about cradle to cradle. That's fantastic. And absolutely where we in the UK can make a difference in terms of recycling and use of materials. So that's another big thing for me. And just on foresighting and skills, it is actually also in Bayes' remit as well, because Innovate UK are putting a lot more money into skills and training, particularly in innovation. So watch this space, and we're keen to engage with colleagues who wish to know more about the Catapult. You know, we're a government funded organisation, and, you know, come and talk to us, and we want feedback too. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. It's a shame. I think he's been held up because David Bailey from Birmingham University, who was on the programme, sadly wasn't able to join the panel this afternoon. I'd love to have got some input from him on the academic side, but that is something we're going to be talking about as one of our programmes in this series is innovation and how we get ideas into commercialisation, because that is surely one getting the great ideas we have in this country into products and services must surely be one of the ways to achieve Catherine's ambition. Alan Norbury, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yeah, I think I was just referring back to, I think, Paul Bagwell's discussion around what I call upscaling. So one of the challenges we have in the UK, I think the Catapults do a fantastic job in terms of developing pilot products, pilot lines. But the next challenge for these innovative organisations is, how do you go from making 1 to 10 to 100 to 1,000? And that's another massive challenge. And I don't think we give those sort of organisations a great deal of support in the UK. And the problem is that other countries do, and they offer a great deal of support. And I've seen quite a few examples where we've had entrepreneurs that have developed products in the UK, actually proved them in the UK, and then been attracted to other countries to upscale them. And I think we're missing out on a trick, because that's where the real return on investment actually takes place. Okay,
thank you very much. Just before I come to Vince Cable for a final thought, Barry Leahey had a note in the chat box about the skills thing, which is obviously automation, digitalization is very much a way of filling the gaps we have. Andrea came back and said, she raised the question that Barry himself raised, that often in order to get grant support for digitalization, automation, you have to guarantee you're going to increase your headcount, which of course is actually the opposite of what you're trying to do. And Simon Marsh quite rightly comes back and says, change the structures. And that, I think, will probably apply to a great many of the subjects that we have been addressing today. Change the structures. Vince Cable, can I have a final thought from you, please?
Well, it's a simple one. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I mean, there are some very strong companies out there doing very good work. We've got, as we heard at the beginning, you know, there is some practical industrial strategy going on in the aerospace industry and the car industry. I think, you know, Bill may well have responsibility for implementing all this in about 18 months' time. And I've already spoken to his boss. You know, we need to build on what we've got. We've got a structure that we've tried. We've got very good institutions like the Catapult network that need to be better resourced and built up. So that you know, I don't want to set hairs running in all directions. I think we talked a lot about industrial strategy. We've got experience of it, and we've got institutions. So let's build on them.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Vince. And thank you, everybody who's been on the panel and who's been watching the webinar today. We very much appreciate it. This is the first of our debates. As I said, the next one is going to be in January, and we're going to be focusing more closely on net zero and on the challenges and opportunities that it presents. So once again, thank you very much indeed for being with us. From Johnny and myself, goodbye.